So how many people here are mythology lovers? Wow, that's something. So now I'm sure those who love mythology are not unfamiliar with Kavita's work. And so without much ado, I will go on to her next and the latest book, that is Ahilya's Awakening. And one thing I'll admit right away is I'm not, she's telling me not to tell you. So I don't know too much about mythology. To me, Ahilya is someone I have heard who got turned into a stone because she did something bad. As a child, I heard that. And then when Rama came, he turned.
But I think that's
her
exactly, that is exactly what
so
it
now,
is
but
about.
then that is not right, actually. And Kavita will tell you why and how and what her perception of Ahilya is.
Yeah, because I think when you say Ahilya, I think it was like I had to say, no, it's Ahilya and not Ahilya Holkar. So it is not historical fiction, and it is definitely something on mythology. But I think as she very rightly said, I think most of us know Ahilya because of that single episode where she's turned into a stone. And even the whole thing about why. I mean, no one even really wants to know why she was turned into a stone. And then Ram comes, and then and then he touches. The moment he touches her feet, touches the rock, she turns into a woman. Now, this small incident, I remember, I have to find it actually a little irritant, because the most, the most things which are inflicted upon is upon Ahilya, and she has absolutely no say in the entire incident. You find that, okay, there's a Rishi Gautam, he's enraged, he finds his wife is unfaithful with Indra. Then you find this handsome Indra who is obsessed about Ahilya, and he seduces her. And that, where is Ahilya? Where is Ahilya's voice? This whole thing is that you know so much about an angry Rishi Gautam, and you know about a flirtatious Indra. But what do you know about Ahilya as such? And then that whole thing, if you start going backwards, there's a lot of divinity connected to her, and like she's created by Brahma. So I think the whole idea was, since she's created by Brahma, that means she's perfect. And then the irony of it, if she is perfect, how far she moves from the perfect woman to an adulterous woman. And now this extreme range is sort of concentrated in that one episode. There's nothing, it is just a mention. I mean, it's like a story being told, कि ऐसे एक औरत थी, वो ऋषि की बीवी थी, and then Indra liked her, and then that they had. Now that particular incident about Indra and Ahilya also is so ambiguous, unfortunately, through the years or through the centuries, is because I think we forget that Valmiki's Ahilya, she wanted to be with Indra. It was not that she was seduced by subterfuge. She was not tricked into it. This whole thing about Indra tricking her into it, because then if he has tricked her, honestly, I mean, that's how I started thinking backwards, is that if he has tricked her, then why does she need a curse? Why should her husband be angry? Then she becomes a victim. So that is exactly what has happened with Ahilya, that the different stories, of course, about her, by the end of it, she's just a victim. There are certain cases where they said, okay, Indra even raped her. If that is so, then what right does a Rishi Gautam have to give a curse? I mean, she is the victim. She should be the angry one. She is the one who should be asking questions. But then if she is not the victim, and she has done it voluntarily, then also is this whole thing question about infidelity and a penalty to infidelity. I think that is exactly what Ahilya's story is about. And when you are talking about the very fact that it is mentioned, I think it is the mention. It's a very tiny episode, but which has a huge impact in the sense that it is sort of a precursor to what is going to happen to Sita later. If you actually see Ahilya's story, when you're talking about marriage, you're talking about marital equations, when you're talking about infidelity, when you're talking between marital relation and infidelity, what we are really missing out is the right of sexual desire of a woman. I think that is the point where that is very important. and that is being totally missed out through patriarchy. Because I think Valmiki's Ahilya questioned this. The fact that she said, no, it was, I did it voluntarily, it means a lot. That she desired Indra for whatever. It could be a mistake. For that moment, she desired him and she succumbed to the temptation. But the whole, I think the grace and dignity of Ahilya is that after her mistake, how she, if she is weak enough to succumb to the temptation, I think she is brave enough to suffer the consequences. Because now this consequences, if you say, is again a curse. So I did not want, actually I wanted to, all the three characters, whether it's Gautam, Ahilya or Indra, they have been sort of stereotyped in this entire story, in this triangle. So the first thing I think the whole problem was lessening the divinity part of it and making them more human. So each of them I have shown more as human people with flaws, with their follies, with their fallacies, and the divine intervention is minimum. So I have not shown her as Brahma's daughter. I have shown her, which is a thread by the way, in which is very much a thread, where she is a daughter. She's a princess. Her brother is she's a twin, and her brother is Divodas, who was one of the most powerful kings. By the way, this is historically true, that he was one of the most powerful kings, and in fact, his son or grandson was responsible for that famous 10 kings, and where there was a battle of the Puru races. I think these were all wars between clans. So I have taken this story, and I think this is the first time in out of my 6 books where I have actually mixed history and mythology, because this whole thing of making Ahilya the perfect woman. No, Ahilya, though it means a woman without blemishes, I mean, if you see the literal meaning, it is, the whole thing was to show her with her flaws, to show Gautam with his flaws, to show Indra with his flaws, and how they interact in a given situation, in a given story, and then how it proceeds. So, this particular episode, of course, happens to be the end of the book, which was, so going, I mean, literally rewinding and bringing her story up, creating an Ahilya who is a princess, who decides, why would she marry a man who is 20 years older to her, who is a rishi, when there is a handsome Indra next to her? I mean, this whole question, when you talk in the modern equivalence, or in any equivalent, I mean, a woman, if she's given a choice between an old man and a young guy, whom would she choose? A young girl, if so I think that is how the story proceeded. And to make it rational too, I wanted to, even Gautam, I think Gautam has really suffered the most, because he's been, poor fellow, has been reduced to the angry husband who finds his wife, and he's sort of cuckolded. And then of course he's going to get angry, he's going to curse. But then how relevant is the curse? So that's how actually the story got developed. And
I wanted to ask you here that do you think at that time the women were more liberated than, later on? If you see mythology, one would say that Ahilya had made a choice. Okay, that means she was a very broad-minded person who knew her choices. So, would you say that?
Yes, definitely, because when you see mythology, I mean, if you see the text, even in Mahabharata, if you actually see the way Satyavati behaves, and see the way, in the same scenario, see how Kunti behaves. So that immediately tells us that the liberalism, it is how the stories, besides society, how the stories and the literature, everything became patriarchal. I think mythology itself became a victim of patriarchy. So when you see the earlier women, whether you see Devyani, I mean Devyani, she actually forces Yayati to marry her. So all these women, I mean, they were extremely, they knew whom they wanted, what they wanted, whom they wanted to marry. So I think Ahilya was also one of them. She marries a rishi, and at a particular point, if she has a certain attraction towards Indra, and she got, whether now this, I think it was not, there was no question of endorsing infidelity, there was no moral judgment here. The question is, yes, it happened, and then what?
Even then, would it not be patriarchal to, excuse the man for it and punish the woman?
Of course.
If you see,
that is why that whole irony, the parallel of Indra is there, because he is married to Sachi that time. He is also being unfaithful to his wife.
But he goes scot-free.
No, his curse, he is cursed. Gautam does curse him. But then after a point, his curse is diluted. What about Ahilya? This whole question of this entire double standards of punishment, this whole thing of punishing, and this, that is the, I think that is the problem of, it's a social problem where we judge very, very easily without knowing the, I mean, it is not, what do you say, each one is holding his own court and holding the other person innocent or guilty. I think Ahilya is presumed guilty without ever, and the whole thing is that she never says anything. She never talks, there is no question of it, and that's why there's so many stories. If you actually read about Ahilya, there's so many short stories, I mean, little snippets about her where each author or each writer has tried to delve on this. So yes, I think the original Ahilya was definitely more assertive in the sense she knew what she wanted. And she got what she wanted. Now, after she got what she wanted, was she ready to take it? And she took it. So, if you're talking about patriarchy, yes, definitely. I think the earlier women, as I said, Devyani and Satyavati, are definitely more, not only assertive, they're aggressive. Then, let's say, even a Draupadi. See, Draupadi becomes aggressive at a very later stage when after the Vastraharan. If you see Draupadi, there is no, the whole thing is, though she is a daughter of fire, her entire, the confrontation, moment of conflict and confrontation comes during the Vastraharan. Till then, I don't think Draupadi does anything which is beyond the, a certain mold or the mores of that time. So if you see a Draupadi or even if you see a Sita, the respective protagonist of both the epics, I think the previous women in the epics are definitely more, they have been given the freedom. They are not only given freedom, they grab the freedom, they want that freedom.
But they were also wronged.
No, there is no question of wrong and right here.
Sita was punished for something actually, to prove herself.
Exactly. Now this whole...
even Draupadi, to marry 5 people, it was not her will or wish. It was sort of given to her. And so with Ahilya, even if she got into an act, she was the one who was punished. So in a way, these women were wrong.
Yes, these were wronged women. That is why I think the end of the book of course, is obviously fiction, where there is a conversation between Ahilya and Sita. Because I think these two women are the most wronged women, especially in the Ramayana. They are the most wronged women, seen as the most wronged women, and they are the most wronged women in the epic. Because I think that whole entire conversation is very interesting. I think that it's an epilogue, but it is actually forms the crux of the whole story, where this entire act of judging, I mean, this whole is not about just marital relationship or sex or infidelity. It is a question of our general attitude to judge people. What the other person...
the women.
Yes. And we judge women very harshly. The women judge women very harshly. The men judge women very harshly. And this whole situation, given the situation, I think all these women, they were brave in their own right, because they did what they wanted, and they got what they wanted. And more than anything is that they got the respect also. It's not that, in fact, that is what the whole thing about Ahilya, where how she moves from a devoted wife, she becomes the adulterous woman, and then again she becomes a figure, like she is one of the Panchakanyas. She is the first of the Panchakanyas who, where they are actually worshipped. And I think in some cultures where I think Ahilya is sort of a black stone, a reminder for a bride that please do not make the mistake what Ahilya does. So even now, yes. So the whole thing is Ahilya, we don't even realize Ahilya. We have Ahilya right from a marriage day or from a wedding day, where we are reminded, yes, if you make those mistakes, you have to suffer for those mistakes. But then this whole question, of course, is question of mistake. It's a question of asking, what about the man? Indra also made those mistakes. The whole question arises, if Gautam is standing as a person who is passing judgment and who's meting out the punishment, why is Indra's punishment, why is Indra's curse lessened then, and why is Ahilya made to suffer for so many centuries, and it's only till she meets Ram that she liberated? This whole question of liberation of Ahilya, I think that was the main question of my book, was did she really need liberation? Why was she trapped in the first place to be liberated? What does she want to free herself from? And I think what she actually wants to free herself from is not only free thought and free action, is this entire expectations, the social expectation, the personal expectations, which are pressured on a woman, and if she slips in some way, the whole world turns against you. In Ahilya, she loses everything. She loses her family. She not only loses her husband, she loses her family. And then yet we revere her. Why is she still a reverential figure? You know, the entire paradox of Ahilya is this. That is, as someone, I think someone called her a certified adulteress. If she is a certified adulteress, then why is she still a revered figure? So this whole paradox, I think was interesting.
The reverence comes out of the feeling, again, it's a very patriarchal
Exactly.
thing that they want to revere people like satis.
Yeah, it's very
Easy to manipulate and who really suffer in silence. It is suffering in the silence which is revered. If you talk back, you are
Exactly.
bad. You are a vamp. You are a bad woman. If you keep quiet and take whatever punishment, you are a good woman. You are
and it is very easy to make her into a devi and worship her rather than try to find your own mistakes. How do you have the even right to pass those judgments? So this whole, it is not just a social issue, it's more on a very personal level. I tried to make it because each one passes his judgment on Ahilya. I mean, and through the years, I think that's what has been happening. And she needs a Ram to liberate her. So that's the whole irony. And then the same Ram, how he reacts to Sita. So this story is very much important because it brings out the not just the hypocrisy, it brings out how a person when he's in a different situation can react differently from what he had said before. I think even in Ahilya, I think there's a conversation in the book I've read where like a typical innocent girl, she is very righteous, she believes, she is naive enough to believe in the ideal, and then she herself goes through that. So what you say, I mean, it's like they say it's like God or fate gives you a slap when you are the most righteous, because it's actually testing you, and that is exactly what happens with Ahilya also. So, and when you are talking about women who were, I have given instances where Rishi's wife, the whole thing of abstinence, and how example there is of Agatya and Lopmudra. When Lopmudra demands that, okay, you are a Rishi, but you are also a husband, and I want my conjugal rights. You have to give me my pleasure. You might be a great man, you might be a knowledgeable, you might be a scholar. And Lopmudra has actually put this in couplets. So these sort of, I think that's what I mean. They heard the women were asking and they wanted it. They demanded, I'm a wife, well, I'm also your lover. So I think that's amazing where Valmiki's Ahilya does that, or Lopmudra does that, and see how she has been reduced to, sort of a victim, or sort of a damsel in distress who is just waiting for Gautam to curse her or an Indra to seduce her. I mean, she's much more beyond that.
I think it's a very complex kind of a situation where you have a dichotomy, totally, diverse kind of behavior from the same person. On one hand, you have some man, saying this woman is bad, and then, condoning it, and then again punishing her for the same, or, looking down on a woman when you are an equally guilty party. So those kind of dichotomies still remain in the society, as we see.
Yes.
So, okay. Now coming back to the general topic, I would ask you why you actually thought of writing mythological and why women?
Okay. I think this whole thing on mythology is, I'm a literature student, so when we used to do Milton, or let's say Keats, or this entire literary allusions of mythology is very strong in English literature and in any literature. And I think when I read, when the whole thing was, when I decided to write a book, my first choice was, of course, write a crime thriller because I'm a avid crime reader. But then I said no. The other thing was mythology, because I think I use mythology as a literary device, because I think it gives me a canvas to put in contemporary thoughts. It gives me a weapon to for everything. I mean, it's literally a literary device where you have your characters, you have your events, you have your plot, you have your narrative. And then the moment, because I'm choosing women and especially sideline women, the moment the spotlight is on them, I think the plot remains the same, but the narrative changes, where the woman who is being put on the spotlight, she appears before you, you actually see her properly. Then she asks questions, and she doesn't just ask questions, she demands her answers. So this whole, and there are a lot of these small, supposedly marginal characters who are small, but I think they have huge, major impact. They are there for a reason. Whether it's Shabri, whether it's a Shurpanaka, they are all trigger points. If you actually see all these, or Menka, I mean, I'm talking about the women whom I have written about. All of them are, in some point they are trigger points where they are the ones who have pushed the plot forward. If Menka, that whole incident about Bharat would not have been there if Menka was not there. If Menka had not seduced Vishwamitra and they had a child called Shakuntala, and then the Bharat. So the whole thing, the origin of a Mahabharata is the story of Menka. Then if you see a Surpanaka, you cannot imagine, Ram would not have met, I think, Ravan without Surpanaka. Yes, because this whole, so they are, though she is the antagonist, female antagonist of the second part of this thing, all these small women characters are, I think they are all worth a book. They definitely deserve a book, because we don't know, because it's not that, okay, you can forget one character and say, okay, nahi hai wo. If she was not there, it would have, no, it doesn't happen that. A Shabri is important, a Devyani is important, a Satyavati is important, because without Satyavati, I don't think the Mahabharata war would have, I mean, she was the one who sowed the seeds of discontent. Or you take any, I mean, we generally talk about mythology. Mythology is actually seen a lot through a man's eyes. So when you see, and we are, unlike Greek mythology, we have a lot of women populated in our mythology who are not only just women, they are all heroic in their own way. Each one, if you see, actually, if you see a Gandhari or a Kunti or Urmila, or, I mean, Urmila, that's Lakshman's wife, you see all these women, if you see, each one has a role, whatever, however small it is, they are there for a reason. They are not just there like a serial, they're just not there to populate the serial and make it look very nice and, okay, itne log hai, itne characters hai. No, each one has a reason to be there. So, the thing is, why women? I think even men will agree with this, that I think women are more interesting than men. I think, I'm definitely aware.
I agree with that.
So I think I'm happy that the men would also agree to this.
We add the color in their colorless lives. Okay,
So-
now I've been told that we are running short of time, so can we take up a few questions?
In this Pune Lit Fest, we have been attending so many sessions over here. Some people have been talking of historical books, some of mythology, some of ethics, some of fiction. I find a combination of all these in your book. I don't know, you can't certainly mix, I feel, history, mythology, fiction all together. If it is mythology, it can't be history. If it is history, it cannot be fiction. But here I find a combination of all this. How do you grade this book?
Your particular Ahilya's,
Ahilya's book.
yeah, this is the first book where I actually mixed history with mythology. And of course, there was romance. I mean, romance, I think, unfortunately, is there, or fortunately, is there in all my books, because I think we take romance in a very mushy form. Romance, I think I'm more interested in relationships. So whether it could be, let's say, historical relationship, mythological relationships, or criminal relationships, I think relationships, mythology is about human relationships. When you are talking about stories, they are not stories 1,000 years old. They are stories, why are they relevant today? Why do we identify with them so easily? It's because they are our stories. They are not stories about gods at all. They are stories about humans, about mortals, about our mistakes, our follies, our fallacies. And as I said, mythology is a huge canvas. We just see it as Ramayana or a Mahabharata. But when you see, the whole thing, the fantastic element about it is that it's very layered. And as an author, I think I get that creative license to unpeel each layer. And in that process, there could be a little of history, there could be a little of other genres coming in. And but the whole, my canvas is, that's why people ask me, oh my God, this is your 6th book in mythology. Are you going to write, you're going to continue with mythology? I said, yes, because it's huge. It's actually very huge. And I think because we are writing in English, we sort of realize it now. But if you see regional literature, Our regional literature is full of mythology. It's all based on, I think the finest literature is based on a mythology, because for us, we are very fortunate to have a mythology which is so dynamic, which is so living, which is so palpable. We see, and it's not, I'm not talking about religion here at all. I'm talking because it has, I think our mythology is, what makes it unique is that a huge philosophical content. It has great psychological impact and philosophical content, which other mythologies don't have. कितने भी लोग
Whether you take the Egyptian mythology or Roman or Greek or anyone, the enormous amount of social content and the history and everything, it is all. Yeah, so it is an all-encompassing kind of a genre. There is no limitation to it.
It is very, very, the whole thing is very, very ambiguous. And this ambiguity gives the author, it's always been there. I mean, when you're talking about Shakuntala, the Shakuntala which we know is Kalidas's Shakuntala. It is not Vyas's Shakuntala. Vyas's Shakuntala, there was no question of amnesia here. Dushyant was a playboy. He seduced the Shakuntala and she waited for him. He did not come back. She never went back to him. It is only when her 12-year-old son asks her that who is the father, that time she realizes as a mother that her son is entitled to know who the father is. And that is the time she goes to Dushyant. But the story which we know of Shakuntala is Kalidas's Haryantra. So that is the liberty you give to an author and a writer. And I think that becomes a part of the collective consciousness afterwards.
How do you create fictional stories out of the mythological characters? Like they're not, like they come out of your mind, they're not real, like according to real mythology. And where do you do your research?
What's that?
How do you do your research for this mythology?
Okay. Research is huge. So much so that I think sieving it becomes a problem. I think writing is very easy, but actually sieving that entire information. But okay, let me talk about, let's say, Ahilya. Ahilya, there's nothing about it besides this episode. So now, as I said, I used the thread about she not being Brahma's daughter, but I used her as a princess, who she is a Puru princess, daughter of king. I mean, she's a princess, and her brother is her twin brother is who happens to be there in history. Now, Ahilya's character is largely based on this, through the characters of a Rishi Gautam or an Indra, or let's say a Satyavati. Again, there is nothing, Satyavati, if you see, she's there for the longest time in Mahabharata, but then you don't know, she's always in the background. I sort of extracted Satyavati through Bhishma. So when I'm making these small characters, sort of bring them alive, if it was Urmila in Sita Sister, Urmila again was sort of born because she was as Sita's sister, as Lakshman's wife, as importantly as Janak's daughter. Because we don't see them as that. Because, if you see Janak was one of the, I think I personally believe he was the first feminist man. He was one of the few kings who never aspired for a son. He had 2 daughters, one adopted, one natural born. And that is to such a father, they were daughters of such a father who held philosophical conferences and all. So my character, the research which you are talking about, the research is there. But for me, more important is how to sort of implement what I have got. Because which thread to use, or even Surpanaka. Surpanaka's story where actually in Lanka's Princess I used the story where she uses Ram and Lakshman to take revenge on Ravan. That is one of the stories. And here I think folk stories are very important, because our folklore is also very rich. That's why it's not just the Mahabharata or the Ramayana. Our Purans are there. Then the folklore is the entire tapestry of folklore. It's so interesting, and each state, each language has its own folklore. And then I think folklores actually they are very emancipating. They emancipate the women, they emancipate this whole question of division of status and class. I think you see the tribal story, and then you hear the story, the original story. This whole beauty, the whole beauty of it is how the common man has adapted these stories and made it plausible in his everyday life. So,
I think we are running short of time. So whoever has any more questions can ask in the background. Kavita will kindly be there for a while if she has to answer them.
Thank you very much for the time given, and I love I love her embarrassment. She said, "No, please wind up." I said, "Okay." So thank you very much, and I hope you enjoy. I hope you enjoyed this session, and I hope you enjoy the books as well. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Tanushree.
Thank
and,
you for
Kavita.
being here. Bye bye.